It's a huge misconception that the federal minimum wage decides how much low wage or hourly wage workers earn, how much they make. In 2021, 98% of the 76 million wage-based workers over the age of 16 made more than $7.25 an hour, which is the federal minimum wage. Now, some people will say, well, around 30 states have higher minimum wage, so that might be a reason. Well, sure, but 98% across the country, that you can't explain that by pointing to the fact that some states have a higher minimum wage than the federal minimum wage. And so it's a huge misconception that the minimum wage determines how much people make.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our good friends over at AMP America, folks. Stop going to the corporate media for the news you need to know. Go to AMP America instead. We have news pieces, opinion pieces, podcasts, and more. All of that over at ampamerica.com. Also, the Brian Nichols Show and yours truly are powered and sponsored by our phenomenal studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle. Now, folks, I've been talking about Cardio Miracle well over a year now because the results are in. The Cardio Miracle difference, 1,000% real. Now, if you want to learn more about how Cardio Miracle can help lower your blood pressure, lower your resting heart rate, improve your pump at the gym, improve your restless nights of sleep, stick around. Later in the episode, we're going to talk about all that and more. But first, we're going to go beyond intentions, right? Because here at the Brian Nichols Show, we talk about this, the danger of do-good politics, the danger when people say, well, we have a problem. Maybe we should ask the government to solve this problem. Yeah, no, there is a lot of danger there, especially when good intentions are not enough, which is why I needed to have the author of a brand new book called Beyond Intentions here on the show. I just finished reading it, so we're going to discuss some of the main pillars of the book I think you in the audience need to know. Joining us here to discuss that book and more from Young Voices, Ben Ayanian. How you doing, my man? Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Hey, Brian, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. Ayanian, by the way, folks, we were talking before we hit the record button. I'm terrible with pronunciations of names. And I said, Ben, how do we say your last name? And he goes, that's a question I get often asked. And then he pronounced it Ayanian. And I said, oh, it rhymes with Iranian. And that's how my brain works. So, Ben, I got your name right today. I'm so proud of myself. But that's not why you're here. You're not here to talk about your name. You're here to talk about your brand new book, Beyond Intentions, how progressive economic policy initiatives would harm society's most vulnerable, which goes, I guess, right against the idea that many of our friends on the progressive left lead with, and that is, well, if only there was a government program, Ben. But before we dig into your brand new book, do us a favor. Introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience without my Ayanian references.
No, you nailed the last name pronunciation, so I appreciate that. Hey, everybody. I'm Ben Ayanian. I'm a contributor at an organization called Young Voices. It's a nonprofit that represents young pro-liberty writers and commentators like myself. As Brian has kindly introed, I just wrote a new book, really critiquing the progressive economic agenda. And also in the fall, I will be entering law school.
Ooh, you're entering law school. What are you going to be studying?
I'm hoping to do, business and corporate law.
Not just law. You're actually going to specify where you're.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and concentrate in business law.
Love it. Well, how about this? Today's episode, we're going to concentrate on 3 areas of your book. I call these the leading pillars. Now, the first pillar I want to discuss here. Before we discuss pillars, Ben, let's talk about this book and just the genesis to this book. Now, I gave my commentary. We talk about here in the show all the time the danger of do-good politics. This book seems to maybe be same church, just different pew. Talk to us about what made you want to go ahead and write this book and specifically address the areas that outline where intentions just aren't good enough.
I wanted to write this book because progressives are often painted as the group of individuals who care about the forgotten man and woman, the working class, the working poor, and people who are struggling to get by. Progressives try to position themselves as champions of those individuals. And I think that a lot of policy debates devolve into arguments about who is more, moral than the other, which, there's definitely a moral component to policy debates, but I think that those conversations start to deteriorate pretty quickly. So I wanted to write a book that acknowledged the good intentions of progressive voters, at least. We can debate whether or not progressive politicians or progressive bureaucrats who really ought to know better about the effects of the policies they champion. We can debate whether or not they have true, genuine good intentions. But I think voters who support progressive economic policies, I think they come from a good place. And I think that the way to reach out to those individuals is to acknowledge that, libertarians, progressives, conservatives, even so, socialists, a lot of us, we want the same thing. The question is, how do we get there? And I, as a libertarian, have spent a lot of my free time reading and writing about economic policy. So I wanted to put together this short book about the most hotly debated economic policy proposals. I wanted to talk about, are progressives actually diagnosing a real issue? Oftentimes the answer is yes. But then the question is, how did the issue arise? And where progressives often go wrong is they don't understand that the problem they're trying to fix has often, come to be because of government intervention, and so they prescribe more government intervention. Whereas I argue that actually the answer to a lot of the problems they want to tackle is removing government involvement from the economy.
It's almost like incentive structures matter or something, Ben. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Incentives are everything. And, it's important to not just espouse our positive intentions, our desire to help, the little guys, so to speak. It's important to actually understand, what are we advocating for? And unfortunately, I think politics, as you say, incentives matter, right? So that's a pretty simple point for people to digest, that we all have different incentive structures and they can shape behavior in certain ways. Unfortunately, economics, generally speaking, is spoken about in these esoteric terms with all kinds of equations and numbers that people really, your everyday American is not going to want to spend the time really to try to understand all these things, because everybody has lives, right? They have jobs, they have family, they have friends. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about economics is that it's this overly complicated area that's off limits to everyday Americans, and is only accessible to the people with master's degrees or the people with PhDs who are on TV talking about GDP growth and unemployment rate. It's really in terms of actual economic policy debates, you don't have to understand any of that. You have to understand incentives. You have to understand basic economic principles like supply and demand. And if you can really get a good grounding, then you can block out a lot of the noise in these policy debates and judge them for yourself. And so I wanted to equip readers with the ability to do that in an accessible way. That's why the book is only a little over 100 pages.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be welcoming to people who really haven't delved into economics too much.
Which, I mean, that is sometimes the hardest part, is getting people who need to be interested in this stuff actually interested. And that is why my show, come on, everybody, say it with me. What's my slogan? Meet people where they're at on the issues they care about, right? Because at the end of the day, people don't really care about our issues. They care about what matters to them. So let's meet them on those issues and bring solutions to the table, but also articulate where solutions from the past went wrong. And as a sales guy, that is literally my job, is to sit down with somebody, figure out where they are today. What are those pain points? What are those problems? How did you get here? And let's start unwinding. And with this, you have a lot here that you dig into with all the facts and figures, outline all the stuff is the links, or not links, my goodness, the source notes are all there in the book as well. So folks, if you want to go ahead and check out Beyond Intention, please, links are in the show notes. Go check it out. But there are three areas, and I'm going to call it the three pillars for this book that I want to focus on today. The first of which is the minimum wage. Now, Ben, we hear this all the time. The minimum wage is what's helping keep the poorest among us from at least having enough money to put food on the table. Come on, Ben. What person wouldn't have it, the goodness in their heart to, at the very least, have a livable minimum wage for your average, mom, dad, little kid who's growing up and starting their own job and trying to just earn their stripes in the world? What's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of problems, as you know about.
How about that?
Yeah, in regard to them, you're putting me on the spot. It's big. I have to defend my morality here now after that charge. It's a huge misconception that the federal minimum wage decides how much low wage or hourly wage workers earn, how much they make. In 2021, 98% of the 76 million wage-based workers over the age of 16 made more than 7.25 an hour, which is the federal minimum wage. And now some people will say, well, around 30 states have higher minimum wage, so that might be a reason. Well, sure, but I mean 98% across the country, that you can't explain that by pointing to the fact that some states have a higher minimum wage than the federal minimum wage. And so it's a huge misconception that the minimum wage determines how much people make. Our wages are decided by supply and demand, these two pillars of economics. If there is more demand for labor than there is work, then wages will rise. It's that simple. And that's why you see wage-based workers making way more than the federal minimum wage. And so people need to understand that raising the minimum wage is only going to hurt the people that they wish to help. The less skilled you are, the lower your wage probably is. And if your wage is close, let's say, to the federal minimum wage right now, and then the federal minimum wage jumps to $15, $20 an hour, well, if your productivity is not worth that new federally mandated amount, you're probably not going to have a job. At the very least, your hours might get cut. You might become ineligible for benefits. There's all kinds of ways for businesses to try and offset these costs, whether it is, harming low wage workers or is harming consumers by increasing their prices. And so again, this is a prime example of progressives having good intentions. They want to see people make more money. But unfortunately, the solution that they try to put forth is actually going to hurt the very people that they wish to help.
You're literally making it illegal to hire somebody less than a certain dollar per hour wage.
Yeah, it's a legal mandate. It's using coercion through the state. The state is obviously a coercive being. It's backed by the implicit threat of fines, imprisonment, or violence at the hands of the state. That's how the state works. It's actually making it an illegal declaration that businesses have to pay a certain amount. And there's all kinds of case studies that I point to in the book. The state of Washington, is actually the University of Washington studied the minimum wage increases in Seattle specifically, and had all kinds of damaging effects for low wage workers. There's a great article. I'm sure almost everyone in your audience knows who Thomas Sowell is. Thomas Sowell wrote a great article, years ago for the New York Post titled "Why Racists Love Minimum Wage Laws." It's actually a great illustration as to the effects of minimum wage laws. So he went through all these different examples from the 20th century about how people supported raising the minimum wage as a way to basically protect the wages of majority races and to block out minority races, because they understood that if the cost of labor rose, because of a government law, then unpopular minority groups would be the first ones to get fired. Because if it costs more money to, pay individuals, now, yes, if you're an employer, the profit motive is a good counterbalance to prejudice, right? Because if you want to make money, you shouldn't make hiring judgments based on race. But it is true that there's also other, let's say, factors that, employers will consider. Whether or not they like, a certain employee might factor into whether or not they fire them versus another one. And so back when there was rampant racism in labor markets in various countries, there's great examples of majority races trying to promote minimum wage laws as a way to price out minority workers from the labor market. And so it's very ironic that the early proponents of minimum wage laws were racists, trying to harm minorities, but now progressives are the ones who are championing these policies as a way to help, the most vulnerable in society. But I think that the article Thomas Sowell wrote is a great and really powerful illustrator as to, the long-standing negative effects of minimum wage laws.
Man, oh man, it just sounds like Woodrow Wilson's in his grave somewhere, smiling at the prospects that minimum wage could help keep certain people he didn't like out of certain jobs, because Woodrow Wilson was a devout racist, and he was also a devout progressive. But I digress. Let's dig into number two here, Ben, because number two is an issue that a lot of folks in this audience in particular, I'm sure this is going to hammer home and really, register in where they are right now. And that is the idea of college tuition. Now, if you are in college right now, God bless you. I will be thinking of you as you're going through the next blank number of years. And once you graduate, look at that big balance that's sitting in your student loan portal, $100,000, $125,000 and above for certain folks I know of in my circle. Yeah, it's not fun. So a lot of folks hear that and they go, why are we paying for this? Can college tuition be free? Ben, can college tuition be free?
Oh, it can. Should it be? Definitely not, in my opinion, as you know. So a lot of people are supporting this idea of, there's student loan, debt forgiveness. Then there's, tuition-free colleges and universities is another policy that progressives are championing these days. And this is a really good example of progressives identifying a real issue, right? The cost of higher education is a problem. Like, I think it is far too expensive. I graduated from undergrad in 2022, and all of my friends obviously graduated at the same time, or maybe a year after, a year before, and the cost of college is out of control these days. And so progressives are right to identify that issue. But the question is why? Why is it so expensive? And it seems, again, progressives have not thought too deeply about that second step. I mean, if they have, maybe they have, but they're missing the reason. If their answer is free college, then they really can't. I have to believe they don't understand why it's expensive today. And so the best explanation as to why college is so expensive is because the government is deeply involved in funding higher education. They're around 50% of students obtain, government loans to go to college. 50% of students obtain loans to go to college. 92% of those loans originate from the government. Right? So there's some private lending going on, but the vast majority of it comes from the federal government. And so, because the government, decades ago now, got deeply involved in funding higher education is extremely expensive because universities know they're going to get paid, because the government has shown an increasing willingness to dole out larger and larger student loans. So if you're a university, why not raise tuition prices, right? I mean, you're going to get paid anyway. You might as well get paid more. And so the Secretary of Education, William Bennett, wrote an op-ed in the 80s arguing that the cost of college was going to increase far faster than it otherwise would have because the government was becoming so involved in handing out student
loans. What was
his
name? Nostradamus?
Nostradamus. William J. Bennett. Highly recommend looking up his New York Times op-ed about this. He hit it on the head. It was a very prescient piece. So he was right. Professor Vader is a professor of economics at the University of Ohio. He's written about this issue. He's also written a book called, I think it's called Restoring Higher Education. You guys can fact check me on that. It is cited in my book. But so he's written books about this issue, and the fact of the matter, even the branches of the Federal Reserve have acknowledged that tuition rises as a result of government lending for students, and they've shown this unending willingness to continue to fund higher education pursuits at greater and greater tuition costs. And again, I implore the audience, you guys, to think, if you're a college or a university, why wouldn't you raise tuition prices then?
I'm waiting for the audience to respond. Nobody's answering. Okay, gotcha. No, you're spot on, Ben. And this speaks to, I think, again, back to the title of your book, Beyond Intentions, right? Because so many folks, they just get this emotional feeling, right? This do-good feeling, but they really don't think through the consequences of that do-good action, especially when it's done through government force, right? Because when you remove, and as you talked about earlier, when you remove the traditional incentive structures that are present in a true free market, now you're not only helping create a situation where the good stuff isn't really focused on and actually incentivized properly, but the bad stuff on the other side, right, is also not incentivized properly in the negative sense. So if I, now going to real life, if I had an SDR, for those playing along in the home game, an SDR is a sales development rep in the world of business. If I had an SDR and they were booking like maybe one appointment a month and they're not doing a lot of calls and they're just kind of floating to get by, does it make sense for me to give them a $5,000 raise? No, because they're failing. And yet that's exactly what we do with our failing schools. We're like, oh, they didn't hit the test scores we wanted them to hit. Should we give them more money? And it just is backwards, right? It's a backwards mentality, because if you're in business, nobody would do it that way because it doesn't make sense. So this is just, again, speaking to how people have this knee-jerk do-good reaction, and it inevitably will lead to unintended consequences, or maybe my conspiracy hat will go on. Sometimes they are intended, but they pretend they're unintended, which actually leads us to the third and final pillar, which, by the way, this is not the third and final pillar of the book, but rather what we're covering on today's episode. There's a lot more pillars to discuss in Beyond Intentions, link in the show notes. But for today, we're going to talk, as we wrap things up here, Ben, about universal healthcare. Because, Ben, healthcare is a right. It's a human right. Everybody deserves to have healthcare, right?
Yeah. I mean, so healthcare. So this chapter is the longest of the 7 chapters in the book, and that's for a reason. This is a really this is a rather complicated area. I hope in my book that I simplified it for readers, but the cost of healthcare is a huge problem. Whether or not healthcare is a right, I mean, it's kind of an absurd talking point. If you're, as a libertarian, right? As I'm sure many of the individuals in your audience are, as a libertarian, I only really believe in negative rights, which means I believe in rights of non-interference. I believe in rights that protect me from, the interference of others. You can't take my life, can't take my property, can't take my liberty. Positive rights, on the other hand, are really things that progressives believe in. Positive rights are where the government bestows a right on you. Now, that is not a natural right, and it's also a right that the government could then abuse, the government could take away. It's not a sturdy right. We don't have positive rights, in my view, as a libertarian. We only have negative ones. So, no, I do not think that healthcare is necessarily a right. But I do think progressives, again, are correct, I should say, in diagnosing an issue. Healthcare is incredibly expensive. It is a tragedy that individuals forego medical treatment that they need to every year because of the high cost. That is something American politicians and voters ought to care about, whether or not they struggle with their medical bills. It is a tragic idea that someone would not go seek medical attention when they need it because they can't afford it. So progressives, again, want to make things free. And they creates all kinds of poor incentive structures. One, again, it shows an inability to understand, not an inability to understand, but it shows that they have not correctly diagnosed the cause of high healthcare costs. I recommend people read the book. I'm not going to go through every reason today as to why healthcare is so expensive. I will name a couple here. So, for example, the third-party payer system is a huge reason, right? When you go see a doctor, you're normally not the party that's paying. Your insurance company pays at least most of the bill. You probably have a copay, depending on where you're going, but more than likely you do. And so your third party covers the rest. We're an over-insured society. Our insurance is normally provided through our employer, for which they pay a lot of the premiums for, where we pay some on the plan as workers. And as a result, there's tons of money flowing into the medical industry that otherwise could have been given as income, just straight cash payments to workers. And what this does is creates this cycle of overinsurance where there's more money flowing into these areas. And now you have prices rising because of it, which necessitates the need for more insurance. So people get more insurance, which raises prices even more. And you kind of have this downward, cycle. Now, the government also contributes to this in all kinds of ways through various regulations, but also Medicare and Medicaid. Again, that just adds to the third-party payer system. As a doctor, if you're going to get paid, you might as well get paid some more, right? That's a big problem here. Now, there's other reasons why healthcare is incredibly expensive. We restrict supply through various regulations that are part of Obamacare. Obamacare really incentivizes consolidation by paying more money to large health systems for the same services than they would for outpatient facilities. So now you see outpatient facilities of various kinds or doctor-owned practices merging with large health systems, which reduces supply, that increases costs. You see certificate of need laws, where if you want to build a hospital in dozens of states, if you want to build a hospital, you have to go to a state board, to prove that there is a need for your services. Who's going to lobby the board to reject your application to expand health services? It's going to be current players. And so you see this, constrained supply, which ultimately increases costs. And so there's plenty of more reasons. And the third party payer system I could go on for half an hour. We could spend the whole time talking about it. Really recommend, again, people check out the book to really understand the nuances and the specifics of that. But free healthcare is not the solution. Thank you for pointing to the book. Free healthcare is not the solution. It would rapidly increase debt. First off, it would increase taxes on you. Secondly, wait times would skyrocket. You would not be able to get in to see doctors that you need to in a timely manner. That's why you see patients from Canada coming over the border and coming to the United States often, or even patients from England, from the UK coming, to other countries to seek medical care, because there's super long wait times in these societies that have government provided healthcare. Additionally, one issue I want to add, if we don't fund it through massive taxes, we're going to blow out the national debt at even faster rates than we are now. And people tend to only want to worry about the national debt in terms of like a crisis where everything falls off a cliff at once. Every time people take their dollars for investment and buy government bonds with them, that's hurting Americans. Every single time that happens, we don't need this crater to fall off a cliff for everyone to look around and say the national debt is an issue. Right now, the national debt is an issue because dollars that would be invested in private, innovative, productive activities instead are being funneled towards the government and being basically squashed because the government's not an efficient being. It's not, one that's going to actually increase our standard of living. We increase our standard of living through innovation, through better, cheaper goods and services, through private businesses. But if government bonds, four-week, government notes or bills, treasuries, whatever you want to buy, are paying, 5.2%, private businesses now have to compete with that to attract investment. And that at the end of the day harms the most vulnerable because their living standards don't rise in the way that they should. And then obviously when we're talking about healthcare, the most vulnerable is the sick. And if we want to make everything free and delay their treatment, we're obviously harming the most vulnerable when we're increasing wait times exponentially.
Ben, we could go on and on and on, but alas, we are already hard pressed for time, which means beyond going towards our final thoughts, I need to direct people towards Beyond Intentions, because this book is exactly where all your questions from today's episode and more will be answered. Because, as I mentioned, this is just 3 of the pillars that Ben outlines in this very detailed yet very concise book. And look at how thin it is. It's able to be read in probably a weekend or so. That's what I did. So please go ahead, check out Beyond Intention. Links are going to be in the show notes. And for final thoughts, I just want to go back to something we talked about earlier, and that is the idea of incentive structures. Now, I'm going to tell a little story, Ben, and I'm going to turn things over to you. Google. Anybody ever heard of Google? All the folks in the audience should be raising their hand or collectively nodding, I hope. So Google has their big, ginormous campus out in the West Coast. And this campus, I mean, it literally is like a home away from home. If you work at Google, I mean, it's an oasis, right? So you go to this Google campus, and Google was having issues. One of their issues they were having was healthcare costs. They realized that their employees, maybe, they were, smart up top, but maybe not smart when it comes to their diets. So Google started trying to think. They're like, what can we do to help lower healthcare costs? And Google was very, very creative, Ben. They did something that was sneaky, but it actually worked. So Google at this campus also had a just ginormous cafeteria, kind of like in the style of what were those things called? Fogo de Chao. There we go. Kind of like a Fogo de Chao. Like you have all these different little stations all over the place. You can walk all around, get all the food you want. And what they realized was they had this dessert bar, like right next to the main food area. And they realized that a lot of folks were going to that dessert bar like right away, and they were filling the plate up. And Google was like, we think that might be part of the problem. So what do? Now, they could have just taken it and gotten rid of it, but that would have created resentment. People would have been pissed off. So what they do, they just moved the bar a little bit further away from where the main area was. And they're like, okay, let's just let this run for a few weeks. Okay, they do that. And then they're like, you know what? Let's move it a little bit further away. And they do this time and again for about 6 months. Where's the dessert bar at the end of those 6 months? Literally on the opposite side of the cafeteria. Now, it was still there. People could still make the choice, but Google put incentive structures in place to incentivize not going towards the dessert tray. But you know what they did? They started putting healthier options like fruits, vegetables, things that people maybe wouldn't normally just be like, oh yeah, I just had a great meal. You know what I could really use to make this meal better? An apple. Woohoo! Not the chocolate cake, right? Everybody wants a chocolate cake. But they were like, hey, maybe the apple is a better choice. So what happened? They find out more and more people are going towards that fresh fruit. More and more people are bypassing the dessert table to the point now that their healthcare costs started to improve. So I say all that, despite all of us looking at Google and saying, ooh, gross, yuck, Google, you're like a big corporation, mini government. True, but they are a great case study for us to look at in terms of how incentive structures do change behavior, both good and bad. And I can guarantee this story's old. I guarantee that there were some unintended consequences that Google had to deal with behind the scenes that weren't advertised because of their decisions. And I think that at the end of the day is also something we could take away, that no singular action or reaction is in its own isolated engagement, right? Something down the road inevitably will come from our actions or inactions. We might not see it right away. Time preference? What? I know it might take some time. Like when you're trying to lose weight, folks, it is not an overnight thing. I used to weigh 385 pounds, right? I remember the 2 years it took for me to lose 180 pounds versus where we are today. Everybody's like, I need to lose a couple pounds. Can I have some Ozempic? No, because what's going to happen? Oh, maybe your stomach is going to have holes form in it because Ozempic isn't exactly the safest drug out there. So again, time preference, incentive structures, all these things matter. You got to pay attention to them. And folks, you got to move beyond intentions. That's my final thought for today. Ben, what do you have for us on your end?
Yeah, I want to just kind of piggyback off of what you just said. I think
Please do.
everything is really relevant and is really well stated. Incentives are super important. And another thing that I just want to add on top of, this thought of incentives mattering is also this cognitive bias that we often are victim to, without realizing it. So Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in that book, he described a cognitive bias. I won't say the acronym. I'll just describe it. It's what you see is all there is. Right? You can look up the letters. You can figure it out yourself what the letters of that acronym are. But it's what you see is all there is. So oftentimes, our brains, we make judgments about what's in front of us. What information do we have? We're not great at stopping and thinking, well, what other information do I need? What have I not considered, right? I actually think that the dessert example could probably fall into this. If all you see is the dessert right in front of you and you love dessert, well, you're going to go ahead and eat it. But if the dessert is off in the corner, you got all this fresh fruit right in front of you, and you don't have to walk as far to get that dessert. Maybe you don't even know the dessert is there if you just started at Google after they've moved it into the corner. You might not even know it's there yet. You'll probably reach for the fresh fruit. It's the same thing in policy. What you see is all there is. Progressives see a problem. They don't often know much of anything about basic economic principles. I'm not even saying that to look down on them. I didn't know anything about basic economic principles until I decided to start reading about it, until I really got invested in it at some point during my undergrad years. But if it weren't for my interest, I would have never gotten super involved in this sort of stuff. What you see is all there is. If you see a problem, you don't understand some of the possible solutions, right? All you know is the state, right? Progressives think the state is here to provide us goodies. The state is here to make our lives better and to run everything. Okay. They don't know much about basic economic principles or the benefits of private markets. So for them, it's what you see is all there is. They see the problem. They see the government. That's their solution. It's really important, even for, non-progressives, obviously, for libertarians, conservatives, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, right, left, in between. It's important to question your beliefs and to question what are you not seeing in the news. Just as important as what they're showing you is what they aren't. Again, the idea of what you see is all there is. I'm really promoting Daniel Kahneman's book right now. It's a really profound, cognitive bias to consider when we're trying to parse through the noise of all of these important policy discussions.
Ben, you're promoting his book. I'm going to promote your book, Beyond Intentions. Here it is on the screen, folks, how progressive economic policy initiatives would harm society's most vulnerable. Now, for the audio listener, Ben, where can folks go ahead and get their copy?
Hey guys, go to Amazon.com. You can get a hard copy. You can also get an ebook, both priced very cheaply on purpose because I just want people to read the book. That's all it's about. This is not a cash machine, I will say, not even close. I hope you guys enjoy it. Please give it a read. Follow me on Twitter at Benjamin Ayanian. And if you could leave a review on Amazon, I'd greatly appreciate it.
And anybody in the audience who's like, Ayanian, how do I begin to spell that? Don't worry, links and spellings are all going to be in the show notes. Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure, my man. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing this book with me. I got a lot of value. I know the audience got a lot of value. And heck, folks, if you are hanging around here right now and you're saying, yeah, I really enjoyed this episode, well, go give it a share. And when you do, please tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever it is you are, you're enjoying your social media time. Please go ahead and share over there. Also, for the Brian Nichols Show, you can find the program wherever it is you enjoy your podcast or video content. So please go ahead and give us some love over on those different platforms. Like if you're listening to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, please hit that subscribe button. Also, for the video version of the show, yes, YouTube, Rumble, but also Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We are uploading the video version of the program in its entirety on those different platforms. So go ahead, check those out. And when you do, please hit that little subscribe button, hit that little notification bell, and head down below into the comments. We want to hear what you have to say because, yes, we value your opinion here at the Brian Nichols Show. And with that, I want to hear a conversation take place. If you're in the progressive left and you think that we're completely out to lunch, let us know why. Or heck, if you're on the more, let's say, libertarian right, and you're like, good gracious, where's this book been all my life? Yes, now go ahead and let us know how great the book actually is. All that in the show, or on the show notes, all that down below in the comments. And yes, if you are trying to find any of the links we talked about here on today's show, all of those are found in the show notes. So head over to briannicholsshow.com, or if you're in your favorite podcast catcher, you should see all the notes right there or in the description here on the video version of the platform. One final ask, Ben, you know what it is. It is for folks to please support the folks who support us here at the Brian Nichols Show, our phenomenal sponsors like Cardio Miracle, Ebles, CBD, Liquid Freedom Energy Tea, and of course, our good friends over at AMP America. Ben, that's all we have for the audience today. Any final words or thoughts as we wrap things up?
No, Brian, thanks for having me on. It was a great discussion, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm sure they did. So, with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Ben Ayanian. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.